Hey, what's up guys? If you like my content and you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you want to support me, do consider becoming a member of the Raphterra YouTube channel for perks like daily gameplay videos, video shoutouts, and monthly one-on-one coaching. Check the join button below this video for more details. Peace out. Hello there, welcome to the Raphterra channel. My name is Raph and I aim to provide the best Legends of Runeterra content on the internet. I am a Master Rank player who has competed in several seasonal tournaments and in the 2021 World Championships. Today, I'm bringing to you my full guide on Teemo Ezreal Frostbite Puffcaps, the deck that I used to climb on my NA Smurf account from Diamond 3 to Diamond 1 80 LP at 58% win rate. After watching this video and with the right amount of practice, I'm confident that you'll be able to reach Masters with this deck. Teemo Ezreal is a slow burn deck whose goal is to win games by shuffling as many Puffcaps as possible into the opponent's deck, and then stalling until those Puffcaps bring the enemy nexus down to 0. Teemo and Puffcap Peddler are the deck's two main engines for shuffling Puffcaps. If these units are left unchecked, opposing decks will find their deck full of Puffcaps very quickly.
Planting your mushrooms.
Hexcore Foundry is arguably the most important support card in this deck. This card forces your opponent to draw cards with Puffcaps while also allowing you to refill your hand every single turn. This deck runs the Frostbite Package to stall while waiting for shuffled Puffcaps to burn the enemy nexus down. These cards are Iceveil Archer, Brittle Steel, Flash Freeze, and Harsh Winds. Ezreal is the deck's second champion and alternate win condition, due to having perfect synergy with all these Frostbite cards contributing to his level up condition. Level 2 Ezreal can finish the game very quickly when paired with these targeted Frostbite spells and with Mystic Shots. Protection spells like Elixir of Iron and Troll Chant are important to keep key units alive. Three Sisters is the best support spell in the deck as it allows you to either push damage, protect units, or stall the game. Closing the deck build are Veteran Investigator and Avaros and Sentry for early board presence and card draw, Thermogenic Beam for removal, and Chump Wump for some more Puffcap action. Now that you have a good idea of the deck build, let's go into how to actually play Teemo Ezreal. Each game starts with the Mulligan. You will keep Teemo and Puffcap Peddler against all decks. If you already have either of these cards, you can also keep a protection spell like Troll Chant or Elixir of Iron. Hexcore Foundry is a card that you never keep against aggro decks and that you always keep against control decks. Against mid-range and tempo decks, you can keep Hexcore Foundry if you already have a good hand. Against aggro decks, you will also keep Avaros and Sentry, Iceveil Archer, Veteran Investigator, Thermogenic Beam, and Mystic Shot. Games with Teemo Ezreal go in the following pattern. When the game starts, you ideally want to set up Teemo and Puffcap Peddler to start shuffling Puffcaps into the enemy deck. Throughout the mid-game, you want to accomplish three things. First is to keep shuffling Puffcaps while protecting your Puffcap Generators with cheap spells. Second is to deal as much chip Nexus damage as possible. Third is to find a good spot to take a tempo loss and play Hexcore Foundry. Once you have your board set up, stall the game with Frostbite spells while also progressing Ezreal's level up condition.
I'm a peddler, not a meddler. There they go.
Armed and ready. Hold this.
Blood isn't a toy, dear.
In the late game, you will win with either level 2 Ezreal or with Puffcap damage. Now that you know how the games with the deck go, let's go into some general tips. The first tip is a tip that you've probably heard from me from most decks that I play. Always prepare spell mana to protect your key units. The longer you keep your key units alive, the more Puffcaps you'll be able to shuffle into the enemy deck. Inflict as much chip nexus damage as you can. Puffcaps are not the only source of damage in this deck. Find spots where you can sneak in damage by attacking with your units. Inflicting chip nexus damage will make it easier for you to close out the game later on. Find the perfect spot to play Hexcore Foundry. Playing Hexcore Foundry is a tempo loss, so finding the correct spot to play it is important, especially against aggressive tempo decks. Make sure to play Hexcore Foundry only if you are certain that you won't need the mana to defend against your opponent's attack. Once you already have Hexcore Foundry, don't be afraid to start spamming your hand cards. You will refill your hand every turn, so you can afford to be more reckless when playing cards. However, keep in mind to still save Frostbite cards for big attacks on your defense turns. If you have level 2 Ezreal, make sure to check and compute if you have enough spells and enough mana to inflict lethal damage. There will be spots when you can burn the enemy nexus at burst speed with level 2 Ezreal. In the late game, you can push damage with elusive Teemo or elusive Ezreal plus Fury of the North from Three Sisters. This deck at its core is a burn deck, and sometimes it's easy to forget that you can inflict an additional 3 nexus damage with Fury of the North. Now that we've gone through the general tips, let's go into the deck's matchups. You might have noticed that my win rate with the deck was not as high as the other decks I previously showcased in my channel. The reason for this is the deck's poor matchup against aggro decks and decks that have efficient removal like Ezreal Caitlyn or Lux Control. Despite these poor matchups, Teemo Ezreal performs outstandingly well against many meta decks like Pantheon Yuumi, Field Rush Control, Udyr Midrange, and Mono Shurima. These favored matchups against the top meta decks make Teemo Ezreal the strongest Puffcap deck in the game. Before we go into the sample games, make sure to join my Discord channel for the matchup analysis and tips that I will not be able to cover in this video. For the first sample game, we will go against one of the staple top tier decks of the meta, Pantheon Yuumi. For the Mulligan, you can follow the general Mulligan tips while also keeping Ice Veil Archer or other Frostbite cards if you already have a good hand. In this game, I shouldn't have kept Thermogenic Beam since it will be very easily countered in this matchup by Pantheon Yuumi's protection spells. I should have kept only the Teemo and looked for my other engines. Keeping Troll Chant to protect the Teemo is something that I could have considered, but I prioritized looking for Puffcap Peddler or early units that I can block with. Against Pantheon Yuumi, the game plan is to shuffle as many Puffcaps as possible and to just stall with freezes. They can't really do much to counter freezes, although Yuumi's spell shield will be annoying if she's able to level up. Teemo is not too reliable in this matchup since he's easily countered by Sharpsight. However, my first attack connected, which means my opponent probably doesn't have Sharpsight. He might need to commit a strike spell if he wants to get rid of Teemo. Here, I committed a misplay. Using Mystic Shot here didn't really make sense. I just gave my opponent an opportunity to get a fated proc. With nothing much else to do, I played an early Hexcore Foundry. This will allow me to possibly draw my engines, but it also allows my opponent to possibly draw into Sharpsight. In this spot, I went for the open attack to keep my options open. Playing Puffcap Peddler would make him vulnerable to a single combat. I am fine with my opponent passing since my gameplay is just to stall and react. It's very advantageous for me if nothing is developing on my opponent's board. This is now a pretty safe spot to play Puffcap Peddler. Even after playing him, I still have enough mana to protect him from dying. I can start using my freeze spells without worries since I have a Hexcore Foundry to refill my hand. My opponent tries to kill my Puffcap Peddler, but Demacia will always kneel down to Frostbite.
Success is planting your mushrooms.
I set up my second Puffcap Peddler as my first action so that I can get more value out of any spell that I cast for the rest of the turn. Shuffling mushrooms here with my second copy of Teemo wasn't something necessary, but I was particularly in the risky mood during this game. Normally, I would just play it safe and keep the second copy of Teemo in my hand. I used a 0 mana thermogenic beam here in order to get more Puffcap Peddler procs. It's very unlikely that I can use thermogenic beam effectively since I will most likely need to use fast and burst speed spells during my defense. On my opponent's attack turns, I just simply need to stall with freeze guards. During the turns where my opponent wants to develop, Iceveil Archer is a great card to counter fated units with Overwhelm. With a level 2 Ezreal and my opponent down to 4 HP, I ponder on the coolest way to end this game. I went for death by Mushroom Clouds. Teemo Ezreal is favored against many board-centric Demacia decks, just because of the amount of Frostbite cards that we are running. Against other Demacia decks with smaller units like Scouts, it's recommended to keep Thermogenic Beam and Mystic Shot as removal spells. The next sample game we'll go into is against a resurging classic control deck, Field Rush Control. In this matchup, you want to follow the general mulligan tips against control decks. In this game, I mulliganed away everything to look for my units. If I had Teemo or Puffcap Peddler, I would keep Elixir of Iron for protection. You won't feel any early pressure from Field Rush Control. You can set up your engines early as long as you prepare protection for Avalanche, Vile Feast, and Blighted Ravine. Shuffling Puffcaps and playing an early Hexcore Foundry is ideal since you don't have to worry about the tempo loss from playing Hexcore Foundry. If you are able to set up your engines early, stalling in the late game will be easy since you can just freeze Tryndamere and Trundle. With my hand this game, it's possible to exert some early pressure with veteran investigators and Puffcap peddlers. The only downside is that I don't have protection spells yet from a possible board wipe.
Have a mushroom. Have 3.
My opponent uses Avalanche, which might be a setup for Vile Feast next turn. In this spot, I chose to develop and not play around Avalanche anymore since he already used one last round. My opponent has a great Blighted Ravine, but I will be able to inflict significant Nexus damage with my units. I casted Mystic Shot here to get value out of the Puffcap Peddler before he dies. Mystic Shot will always go to the Nexus in the matchup, there's no reason to not cast it now.
What will you have?
Put on me mask, secure me tail, start the day!
A true Fragonian will.
Now, I'm just trying to squeeze in as much damage as I can to the enemy Nexus.
Come with next time. Oh, that's a harvest right there!
King of Trolls coming through!
Another day in the field.
I'll pick 'em, you plan 'em, kid.
She Who Wanders will obliterate any unit that I have, but I can freeze it so that she also obliterates herself. Finally, I was able to find Hexcore Foundry. Now it's just a game of stalling until I draw more of my engines. My opponent casts Field Rush, but this is not a threat since I can just stall with my spells.
Boarding in.
Time for a true display of skill.
I never use my goggles either.
Ezreal and Teemo have finally arrived on the battlefield, but it's likely that my opponent can answer them. In this spot, I use 3 Sisters offensively to push damage and to shuffle more Puffcaps into my opponent's deck. My opponent uses Commander Ledros, which means my Nexus is now in range for Atrocity. I need to make sure that I save enough mana for my Frostbites.
Armed and ready.
In this spot, I can use 3 Sisters to push damage, while still maintaining enough mana for Harsh Winds just in case my opponent casts Atrocity. Teemo Ezreal is generally favored against control decks because you can freely set up your units early without worrying about any early pressure. Also, Hexcore Foundry will usually make them overdraw since control decks usually have expensive spells that will be stuck in their hand until the later turns. Last patch, control decks were very hard to play because of the dominance of turn 6 Mono Shurima. But after the nerfs to Mono Shurima, control decks have risen again, which gives more good matchups for Teemo Ezreal. The final matchup will be a game against another popular control deck, Sentinel Control. This might be counterintuitive, but you need to mulligan against Sentinel Control as if you're playing against an aggro deck. Their fearsome Sentinels can overwhelm you with pressure if you don't deal with them. In this game, I kept Teemo, Troll Chant, and Thermogenic Beam for removal. In this matchup, once you survive the early game against their fearsome units, you will be set for a good late game. Their primary win condition is usually Commander Ledros into Atrocity, which is easily countered by Frostbite spells. Just remember to keep your Nexus as healthy as possible since they would also have access to some burn spells.
Swiftly. Roll this. Armed and ready.
The mum's still like a yodel in uniform.
We yordles in uniform do like a wump.
In this spot, I once again went for the risky play of trying to turbo level my Teemo. I should have left mana up for Troll Chant to protect my Teemo from removal spells. I find myself always playing risky when I have an opportunity to level up Teemo. Sometimes I prioritize fun over logic.
Excuse you. Good one. I'm doing this my way.
Getting 2 Hexcore Foundries on board without having to worry about tempo loss is huge. Now I can start spamming my spells since I can just refill my hand every turn.
Light is a lure in the dark.
Justice firsthand.
Protecting Teemo can go a long way because this will allow me to get off one Nexus hit. Once my opponent dropped to 5 mana, I felt confident casting 3 Sisters into Fury of the North since there's no more possibility of vengeance.
Never know what hit 'em.
Finding details is my duty.
In this spot, I'm looking to minimize all the possible damage to my enemy Nexus. I Frostbite the Buru Sentinel since I know that I will most likely block Vi with my unit.
Locked and ready.
There was a little fella asking for me.
Really? Skitter out from the darkness.
Stay back.
I didn't block with Puffcap Pedler here to keep him out of range of Mystic Shot. In this spot, I have level 2 Ezreal, but not enough spells to win the game immediately at burst speed. I'm expecting an immediate vengeance if I play Ezreal, so I get Chomp Bomb first to get more spells in hand. With my opponent playing Commander Ledros, I can now safely play Ezreal and win this game.
They don't know what they're up against. The world's a big place. Let's see all of it. Sounds dangerous. I'm in. Gotcha. Easy. Like my name.
Now that you've seen the deck in action, let's go into how to tweak the deck depending on what you're facing. If you are facing lots of aggro decks, you might want to put in one more copy of Averroes and Sentry and remove one copy of Harsh Winds. If you are facing more control decks, you can remove one Averroes and Sentry for one copy of Insider Knowledge. Static Shock is a card that I would consider if you are facing decks with many 1 health units like Spider Aggro or Thresh Nasus. I've always been a huge fan of Teemo decks, and I believe a meta where Teemo Ezreal is viable is a great meta. I'm having a lot of fun playing with this deck because games with Teemo Ezreal are never boring. It's always fun to win through Puffcap damage or with level 2 Ezreal. If you are a fan of Teemo decks as well, this is the right deck for you. I hope that you're having a nice day, good luck climbing, bye bye.